All right, welcome back. This is my 1930 Dodge Coupe that we cut the back off of and we're turning into a pickup truck. We put it on a Jeep frame and then we dropped a 4BT Cummins engine in it. Now that you're caught up to speed, in today's video, we're gonna be building a new floor and a new firewall for this thing, so let's get started. All right, first thing we're gonna do is cut this crap out of here. All right, cut those out of there from a big boot. Trying to make some leg room. Next, I'm gonna cut some of this firewall out of here. All right, I'm trying to modify this firewall while still maintaining some of the original parts of it. I need to move the recess portion over so that it's centered over this engine. It's not in the same spot as this 4BT is. So I'm going to cut that part out and move that over a little bit, and then because I want to save the rest of the firewall, I'm just going to fill every one of these holes, and then I want to modify it down here where it curves in towards the interior of the cab. I want to cut that off and make it come straight down so that it'll have slightly more leg room. All right, that was the piece I was after. I wanted it because it has this complex curve in it, and I definitely couldn't replicate that myself because I'm not that good, but I want to move this piece over to about right there. That's going to give the engine a little bit more room, and it's also going to make the firewall more symmetrical because that side's about 8 inches away from the other edge, so this will go right about here. If this looks bad, don't worry, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but eventually it's going to get better, so let me cut this up and tack it into place. Okay, got that tacked into place just enough to hold it for now. You can kind of see, it's hard to see with the engine in the way, but now the firewall is more symmetrical. The little recess spot is the same on both sides. So next I'm gonna fill in the middle part where that's missing. So I just gotta cut a piece of sheet metal for that. Template. Take that piece, put a little jog in it, or a fast walk, whatever you prefer. And then that's gonna go right here on the inside, just like that. I'm gonna tack her in place. All right, that's tacked into place, and I'm gonna finish welding it eventually, just not right now. Next, I'm going to clean this up, cut it straight across so that I can add more sheet metal to the bottom of this. The goal here is to build the firewall out all the way down to the bottom so that I can start building the floor in here. Template. Texas, Louisiana. Couple of back and forths on the brake, doing one side then flipping it over and doing the other side. Got some shape into this piece, and now we're gonna put it inside. I just got to trim this and then tack it in. Okay, got that tacked into place. Next, I'm going to replicate it on the other side. There's the passenger side. This side was a little bit easier since I had just did the driver's side, but it's just tacked into place like the other side. I'm going to finish welding it once I take this cab off of here. But the next thing I'm going to do is start building the floor, so eventually this is going to get cut. I just left it a little extra long so that I'd have something to work with. Okay, the first thing I want to do to build this floor is put some structure in here. So I'm going to take a bunch of this 1x1 square tubing and build like a little skeleton for the flooring to sit on. So I guess let's do that. Okay, here's the floor structure all welded up. Bunch of 1x1 square tube. That's going to support the sheet metal I'm about to put on it, so I guess let's start cutting some sheet metal. First, to make a template out of cardboard, probably going to cut this into a couple of pieces to make it easier to install, because I don't think I can get this out as one piece. Got a brand new floor right here. Lift your back. All right, here's the entire floor just set into place for now. If you look, I left it a little long on these edges because I'm going to break this, fold it up so that we can build the transmission tunnel and have something to weld it to. All right, just bent the edges up in the break. That way we have something to attach the tunnel to. So next I'm going to make a cardboard template. This part, the whole tunnel is probably going to be multiple pieces of metal I'm just going to weld together, and then eventually I'll weld them all to the floor. I think I need some new gloves. These things are about done. Fresh gloves out here looking like Mickey Mouse. Oh boy! It's the next piece. Just gonna weld that into place. There's the third piece. Next, I just got to close in these little areas around the shifter for the four-wheel drive and the outside of the trans case right here. And to do that, I cut this little piece of metal, and I'm going to weld this in right here, and then build the sheet metal up around that. And this is going to allow me a flat spot to mount a shifter boot when I finish the interior out. All right, here's the completed floor. Here. And also this little cover for the transfer case. Are we done? Heck no. Now we've got to pull this entire floor out of here and work on the underside. All right, I got the underside of the floor here, and you can see that I've marked where all that 1x1 is. So now I'm going to drill a bunch of holes in it so that I have a spot to spot weld once I put the floor in. And I also want to grind down the underside of all these spots where there's a joint. Just clean up the welds and make it look nice. Same with the rear piece. So I guess let me drill some holes in this stuff. All right, so I've drilled all the holes and I ground down all the welds, just enough to make them smooth. All this is going to get covered with seam sealer eventually, so it's not that critical that I grind it down or get rid of the weld completely, but I didn't want any sharp edges to catch my fingers on or anything like that. So the floor is basically ready to go back in, but we are far from that point, and let me show you why. If you remember from when I built the 40, I talked a lot about epoxy primer and how that's the best thing you can use on anything that you don't want to rust. And so the next thing I'm going to do is get epoxy on all of this, but it's not ready for epoxy, so I need to pull this cab off of here, finish welding the underside of all of these pieces of 1x1, and then there's some things I want to weld on the back side of the cab, and I got to finish welding up the firewall. Then after that, I got to clean up all this rust, get this wood out of here, basically prep this thing for epoxy. So that's what we're going to do. All right, who remembers this little maneuver? Going up. All right, now that the cab's off, I can access the entire firewall, which will make it a lot easier to weld up. Plus the underside of all this 1x1 on the floor needs to be welded. I'm gonna do all that. Then we can start getting epoxy on it. All right, got the firewall all welded up, all the holes are filled, it's nice and smooth. Now I gotta move on to the underside of the floor. Alright, took all the wood out, finished up the metal down here, got the underside all welded up, and I put a piece of sheet metal in down here. That's going to close off the floor from the rear of the cab panel to prevent anything from getting in there from underneath. Next I need to pull this roof out of here. Took all the bolts out, just got to pick that up, and then prep this thing for epoxy. Okay, got the sheet metal all prepped, and I got it up here in the booth, and I'm just getting ready to put some epoxy on it now. Did the outside floors and the inside. First I'm going to cover up some of the stuff that I don't want to get epoxy on at the top. I'm just trying to get epoxy on all this bare metal for now. The reason I'm putting epoxy on it before I weld the floor in place is because this is all bare metal right here, and I need to put something on top of that in order to prevent it from rusting, because if you don't cover this and then just weld the sheet metal right on top of it, and as soon as this gets wet or the moisture gets to it, it's going to start bleeding rust out of it. So the way I like to do it is cover everything with epoxy, then weld it in place, and then touch up all the welds with a brush. I can tuck a brush in between the sheet metal and the 1x1 to get the epoxy. Also, the other reason why I do it like this is because it's a lot easier for me to spray inside all of these little cavities inside the floor when the floor is hanging like this, versus if this was welded in place, I'd have to lay on my back and spray epoxy up. It's not the hardest thing to do, but it is a lot easier to do it this way, and I can almost guarantee I can get epoxy in all of these little nooks and crannies by hanging it like this, and then afterwards all these spots, once I weld these in, I can just touch those up with a brush. Alright, anytime you do this, you're going to go through a ton of epoxy primer. I'm using SPI epoxy. Restoring a car takes a ton of epoxy, and this isn't the last time this is going to get done. I'm going to epoxy this now, and then once I get a little more work done to it, I will sand some more of the car and re-epoxy it. It'll continually get epoxied and then sanded and then re-epoxied until eventually the entire thing has been covered in epoxy. But I'm going to spray this on here and go from there. Alright, it's the next day. That epoxy's had some time to dry overnight. Next thing I'm going to do is untape all this and then get this back down in the other garage. You can see I got epoxy all over everything. And the underside of the floor. Alright, time to get this thing back on the frame. Going down. Okay, so next I reinstall the floor, and then I'm going to take a paint marker and I'm going to mark where all the spot welds are. Then I take the floor back out. After I take the floor out, I take a grinder to all the little spots. I reinstall the floor. While I had the floor out, I also ground some of the epoxy off around the outside, all the spot welds. If you notice too, when I epoxied this, I put a piece of tape on the edge here so that I didn't get epoxy on that, because I know I'm going to weld the floor completely to the firewall right here. The next thing, we got to weld all these spot welds. Okay, here's pretty much the finished floor. I went ahead and welded a piece of metal in right here, and that's going to give me a place to attach the interior panels once I finish out the interior, but that's not going to be for a long time. Got all the welds ground down. Welding it like this, it does kind of make an impure weld when you first start to weld, but once it burns off the epoxy, it welds just fine. I did stitch weld all the way around the perimeter, and eventually all of this is going to get seam sealed. There's going to be seam sealer along all of this. That's also not going to be for a long time because we're going to be putting more epoxy on here. Here's what the floor looks like from underneath. You can see that it's pretty much 100% covered with epoxy. And what I like to do after, I'm not going to do it right now, but eventually once I take this cab back off again, I take a brush and I dip some epoxy in it, and then you're able to stick it up in between the panel and the 1x1 and get epoxy where all those welds are. You can see there's kind of a weld right there. Right there. I'm not going to do this right now because I've got to pull this cab back off in order to finish out the front of the firewall, but eventually that's how I'll finish off the underside. All right, so there it is. There's the firewall all welded up and epoxied and looking a lot better now. There's not a million holes in it. I know this video was kind of long-winded and not very entertaining, but all of this stuff needed to be done in order to get to the next step on this project. If you're wondering where I've been, I did have some big projects that I had to do over the summer, and unfortunately I was unable to work on this thing and those other projects at the same time, so I apologize for the delay in these videos. But those projects are done, and so it's back onto this thing 100%. Here's the back with the epoxy on it too. That's looking good. In the last video that I put out, I asked for suggestions on what we should name this thing, and one of the viewers, Frank, I won't say his last name, but suggested the Dirty 30, and I really like that because it pretty much embodies what this thing's going to be. It's not going to be a rat rod, but it's not going to be a show truck. It's going to be just like a dirty version of a hot rod, so I think that's what I'm going to call it. It is officially the Dirty 30. I am super excited for the next video. I know the next video is going to be a good one because we're going to be building the bed in the next video, and that's going to be pretty sweet. It's going to be a little while before I put that one out, but look forward to watching it. So I guess that's going to be it for this one. As usual, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you later.